Okay?
Are you gonna read us a few poems?
Yes. Just a little preamble.
Okay.
The preamble is, I started writing poetry when I was 8 years old. I have poems from those years, and they were all written in Chicago, where I lived until I moved to San Jose about 12 years ago. So this one is called Somebody's Child. Chicago is things, grinding steel on an elevated track, punch of a pinball, clack of wood on wood, the thud, the crunch of giant thaws on brick. Slick chick, neon signs go blink. State Street never knows the night, the dark that drowns a young man's heart. It is too bright. Jazz bent, Chicago is waiting. Waiting for what? Waiting for the train to stop. Wait the ball to ring a singing bell, or knock the wooden pins to hell. Waiting for the new high rise. The little girl to paint her eyes. Waiting for red to change to green. Too bright the light. Oh, daddy, oh, da. Chicago is full of blood-pulsed push, a sound of hush, a throttled scream in a whirring machine, a do, a must, a jerk, a thrust, too bright. Stop and chop, fill a bill, steal a wheel, da, run, stop, take, make, what? Yeah, thing, washed up on a sandy shore. Shall I read another one? You know, my memories, I don't have very stark memories of the Depression. What I remember was we lived in this large house. We were always very comfortable. We didn't suffer during the Depression. And my parents never talked business or money in front of any of us. So we didn't really know. But it was quite obvious that something was wrong because there were always people coming and begging for food. And so we always had a housekeeper. And she'd always make, when she would bake, she'd bake something extra that was always there for them. And the other thing was people from other countries who would come to the United States. What kind of work could they do? Most of them went into the selling encyclopedias, and they'd come to our house, and my mother felt so sorry for them. She bought every encyclopedia, I think, on the market. And I was raised on encyclopedias.
What do you mean?
It was the encyclopedias that were my friends. I read them all. So that's how I did a lot of reading. And one thing leads to another, doesn't it? But I remember writing poetry early when I got into third grade, and my teacher discovered that I wrote poetry. She asked me to come up to the desk one day, and she said, "Now, dear, no matter what we're doing, what the assignment is, if you get a feeling that you have to write a poem, you drop everything and do the poem." Now, that was a teacher. That's what you call encouragement. My mother was very interested in theater. Her burning desire was to go on stage, but she couldn't do it with raise 4 children. So she did the next sensible thing. They had the money and bought a large house. It was a 20-room house, and the third floor was nothing, just had the maid's room up there and bathroom. And then there was this huge room that nothing was in, so she had a stage built, and with 2 dressing rooms, one on each side. And it seated, where the audience sat, seated about 100 people. And it was quite something in those days. In fact, it was one of the early neighborhood theaters that other neighborhoods emulated later on. And she invited groups there to perform at no charge. And so we kids grew up on the stage when when we were told what did we do when we grew up. We all said we grew up on the stage. And we all felt very comfortable taking roles. We were 4 children, and we all teased the dickens out of each other. And I don't know. I always had the feeling I was growing up alone because they were all so much older than I. And they never wanted me around, when they were with their friends. And there were no children my age on the block for me to play with, so I began reading early. And I remember starting to read in 1st grade, and I was bored stiff because it was, I forget the name of we all did the same text. It was terrible. And I was reading Schopenhauer.
How old were you?
I'm sorry?
How old were you when you were reading Schopenhauer?
Maybe that was a little later. I could have been about 8 or 9 or 10. Now this is quite different. It's called journal entry, January 1947. Most of the poetry is dated. These hours are rare when restlessness subsides into awareness, hesitantly taking hold at first of the nucleus of a thought, which extends itself like greedy hands to all lines of contribution, a printed word, a paragraph, reflection in dusty corners, the lighting of a cigarette, projection into puffs of air. You and I reassembled into universal thrust, abolishing fears like lights turned on in all dark rooms. The opening of a door within one's locked self, effacing its rusty hinges, ending by leading, the search to the sound of one's inner voice, rabbinically assorting, selecting, and finally building out of words a citadel. These are, most of my poetry is very short.